Good evening and welcome to Lightning Talks, presented by the Seattle Aquarium. I'm Jim Wharton. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Director of Conservation Engagement and Learning here at the Aquarium. Now, the Seattle Aquarium sits on the shores of the Puget Sound in the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people. Now, if you're curious and would like to learn more about the indigenous lands and communities around you, check out the link that we just added to the chat. And no matter where you call home, we're just really happy that you're here with us tonight for Lightning Talks. Now, for tonight's event, we take to the skies and the waters to talk about birds. Now, birds represent some of the most abundant and accessible wildlife on Earth. Anywhere you reside, in the cities or suburbs, on farms, on the coast, in the mountains, even far out to sea, if you look up, you can see birds. Now, you might even see birds when you're scuba diving. It's true. Some diving seabirds, like the common murre, can dive to depths of like 200 feet. Now, birds are no less common in marine environments. They're nesting on coastlines, feeding on schools of fish and tide pool invertebrates. They're even migrating on planetary scale pathways from pole to pole. And we've got 5 great speakers flocking together tonight to tell us more. So, if you've never been part of a Lightning Talks event before, here's what you have in store. 5 speakers have 5 minutes each to share one big idea and not 1 second more. At 1 minute, they'll get a warning, another one at 30 seconds. And if they don't make their time, they'll see a red light and then this. Now, we want to keep things moving tonight, so we won't be stopping after each speaker to take questions, but we really want to hear your questions and comments about tonight's event. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, please put it into the chat. We're going to be collecting them together, and our speakers are going to come back at the end of the evening for a great Q&A. Now, if you enjoy what you see tonight and you'd like to support the Seattle Aquarium, please do consider a donation. When you donate to the Seattle Aquarium, you're joining us in our mission to inspire conservation of our marine environment. And if you haven't yet, please do click like and subscribe and help us get to our 10,000 subscriber milestone. Now, we have a fantastic program tonight, as we always do. We're going to hear about social media superstars from the pandemic. We're going to hear about mysterious murrelets. We're going to hear about seabirds in Seattle, whole bunch of topics and speakers in between. And I'm really excited to get started. So let's get going with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Christy Sterling from our friends at Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, Illinois. Now, Christy is the supervisor of penguins and sea otters at Shedd, and she's here to share the magic they captured taking their penguins on field trips around the empty aquarium during the initial days of the pandemic and what that inspired after. Christy, you all set to kick us off tonight?
I'm ready.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to talk about penguin field trips at the Shedd Aquarium. So here at Shedd Aquarium, we are home to 2 species of penguins. On the left here, you see our southern rockhopper penguins, easily identified by those yellow crest feathers. And then on the right, we have Magellanic penguins, who are more noted by that white C around their eyes. Now, these 2 species of penguins would be found in temperate climates. Therefore, they are suited to leave their habitat and can go to different places in the aquarium. We do, when we are usually open and running, we have programs, public programs, we have public presentations, and we have public encounters. There's some pictures of those. The presentations include a little parade across the walkway, and the encounters include a up to 30-minute encounter, up to 10 guests or so, meeting a bird up close. So this is how it all got started. 2020, when the pandemic hit, the aquarium was closed. We had no guests in the aquarium, so we thought we'd take advantage of it. We brought one of our 33-year-old rockhoppers, Wellington, to the Amazon exhibit. We let him check it out. We took some video of it. As you can see, he's pretty interested checking out the fish. We shared it with our social media team. They shared it, and it was pretty popular and went viral. So once Wellington did those field trips, we decided, where else can we go? So we went to all different places in the aquarium. We went to our penguin area, our otter area, dolphins, belugas, even the front steps. Also, our wild reef exhibit. It's a huge habitat. And you can see some of the animals were even watching as the penguins were checking them out as well. At Shed Aquarium, our mission is to spark compassion, curiosity, and conservation for the aquatic animal world.
What
Watching
do you
the
guys
birds'
think?
curiosity was really awesome, especially like that video by the Wild Reef. Watching them watch that school of fish was really cool to see. And it was really great that, especially during this time, we could provide some lighter moments and bring smiles to the people who were at home and couldn't come to Shed. Also, we sometimes would bring pairs of mates together because if you brought one mate and the other one would not really feel like walking around, the other one started walking, it might follow and encourage it. So it was pretty cool to watch them do that as well. All these field trips were really great for exercise, mental stimulation, and it all provided really great overall welfare. This is a picture of Magellan and Esmeralda in the Caribbean Reef with myself. So after we explored many of the places in Shed, we checked out different places in the city. We went off-site. So we thought that'd be great enrichment for the birds. These places were also still closed, so we had lots of places to go and check out. This picture in the center is one of my very favorite pictures we took of Izzy and Darwin admiring some fossil at the Field Museum. So we went to the Field Museum, which is right next door. We went to the Museum of Contemporary Art, and we also went to Soldier Field, home of the Chicago Bears, just across the street. So you can see they're in the locker room, they're on the field, they're checking out lots of art. It was pretty awesome. So, those penguin field trips also inspired us to start developing a virtual penguin encounter program. We were still closed, but we wanted to connect to guests how we could. So, guests would sign up. We would start on our penguin exhibit, home to 39 birds, and we would talk about our birds. We would answer questions, and then we'd also come to the back where we could highlight one bird up close as well. On social media, we were getting lots of questions about where was Wellington now and where was he going to go next. So we kept everybody updated on his field trips, and he became really popular. He even got his own merch. He got his own T-shirts. Even you could see some of the pictures of those. And toward the end of 2020, it was pretty awesome. Our local paper, the Chicago Tribune, actually named Wellington one of the Chicagoans of the year. So that was pretty big. So we were really happy that we could tell a story, that everybody loved him and took an interest in him. And it was really great to tell his story. And you can see it on the bottom right. He even got to meet the mayor. He got to meet the governor. So he's kind of a big deal around here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's I love seeing the penguins exploring the city. Do you think now that you're open again, do you think the penguins miss their outings?
I definitely think they like having the run of the building sometimes when no one else is around, but we try to find other opportunities to do that.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Christy. If you have a question for Christy, please do put it in the chat. I saw one or two, and I'd love to get some more so we have them for her when she returns at the end of the program for our Q&A. Thank you so much, Christy. Now, our next speaker is Lindsay Adrian, a seabird biologist from the American Bird Conservancy. Now, tonight, Lindsay will be revealing the secret life of one of the most mysterious creatures of the Pacific Northwest, the marbled murrelet, of course. Lindsay, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Jim.
Excellent.
I'm really excited to be here to introduce you to what I think is the most mysterious seabird of the Pacific Northwest. So what is a marbled murrelet? Well, this is a seabird who spends most of its life on the open ocean. They get all of their food from marine waters, and that includes silvery, schooling forage fish, like the Pacific sand lance shown here, and also zooplankton like krill, which is what whales eat. This bird is part of the auk family, so some of its relatives include the tufted puffin, which is the black bird with the brightly colored bill here, and the common murre. Both of those birds also live in the Pacific Northwest. But what makes the marbled murrelet so mysterious is its unique nesting strategy. Now, most seabirds choose to nest on offshore rocks and islands where they can be protected from mammalian predators like raccoons and foxes. So here's a picture of those common murres at one of their breeding colonies. Now, these murres lay their eggs right on the rocks. They don't build a nest, and they find safety in numbers by getting really cozy with their neighbors. But marble murrelets are a bit of an outlier. They evolved to find a completely different niche, and because of that, it wasn't until the 1970s that scientists figured out where it was they were nesting. So their breeding habitat looks more like this. They nest in the beautiful coastal old-growth forests that we have from Alaska to Northern California. They lay just a single egg on a branch high up off the forest floor. This might be in a redwood tree in California, or in a Douglas fir or a Sitka spruce tree farther north, just as some examples. But sadly, a lot of that old growth habitat has been lost to wildfire and timber harvest. The marble murrelet population is thought to have declined substantially over the last 100 years and coinciding with the loss of that habitat. The population has declined so much so that it has been listed by the governments of the United States and Canada as threatened. And so you can see that's a large portion of its range here in North America. And then also the states of Washington, Oregon, and California have listed the species as endangered. So old growth forests have been gaining protections as the importance of that ecosystem has been recognized, but it's a pretty slow process to regrow old habitat that has been lost. And I want to show you why the older age of the forest is important. So here's a picture of a marbled murrelet adult sitting on a nest incubating an egg. Now, these birds need branches that are at least 4 inches across because they don't build an actual nest similar to those common murres I showed you earlier. They just lay the egg on top of the moss or duff or whatever is on the branch already. And that the branch needs to be big so that the egg or later on the chick doesn't just fall off. Now, for most tree species, it can take 80 years or more. That's 80 years or more to grow lateral branches of this size. So when it comes to conservation of the marbled murrelet, many people want to know what can be done while we're waiting for little young trees to grow into big old trees. And I'm going to tell you. So what we can do is address one of the other threats to marbled murrelets, which is nest predation from, in particular, members of the corvid family. That's ravens, jays, and crows. So the Steller's jay, which you see here in its pretty blue tuxedo, and ravens and crows are all known nest predators who take eggs and chicks of the marbled murrelet. And research has shown that populations of these nest predators can be artificially increased in areas where humans leave food waste behind. That would be like recreation areas, campgrounds, and picnic areas. So when you're out picnicking or camping in our coastal forests this summer, that's all the way, all around Puget Sound, down the outer coast of Washington and California and Northern California, don't leave your picnic table unattended. If you look at this picture here, you can see there's a plastic bag of tortillas without any human in sight. Steller's jay could really easily come down, rip that bag open, and have a lovely meal. Instead, what we want to see is clean picnic tables like this, clean up as soon as you're done eating, and securely store all of your food away from wildlife. Keep It Crumb Clean is a campaign that was started by California about 10 years ago, and it's been shown that these small steps that people can take, storing your food away, cleaning up, and not leaving food unattended, actually does decrease the density and numbers of those nest predators, and that can help marbled murrelet eggs and chicks make it to fledge out into the ocean. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. You just made it. Just made it. So what I'm thinking is the corvids, all those birds are so smart and so adaptive. Are they natural predators that are just harder on them because the murrelet's numbers are smaller, or is this something that the corvids have adapted to take advantage of?
We believe that they are natural predators. They all naturally occur throughout the range of the marbled murrelet. But research has been conducted in campgrounds and outside of campgrounds, and it's been shown that additional human food causes those predators to have more babies, and then that increases the likelihood of predation on marbled murrelet nests. And the good news is that the research has also shown that when humans take care of their food waste, the corvids populations go down, but there aren't any negative effects to them. They don't have worse reproductive success. They don't have worse health. So that really shows they don't need the extra human food for their own populations to do what they need to do, but it really does help the marbled murrelet.
That's great. I mean, it's all about balance, right? And I love that that's such a really tangible thing that we can do to help these birds.
Yep, really easy.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. If you all have questions for Lindsay, please do drop those into the chat, and we'll see Lindsay again soon. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Isadora Angarita-Martinez, a flyway specialist with the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. Now, Isadora is going to help us with connecting the dots along the migratory pathways of seabirds up and down the West Coast, and she's going to explain how working with aquaculture firms can help ensure their safe passage. Isadora, are you ready?
I think so. Just let me know if it's screening okay. Because we had a bit of a... Is it working? No,
we're
it's not
still
working.
seeing your presentation mode again.
That's fine. So it should work like this, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you very much for inviting me. As Jim said, I'm Isadora, and I work for the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. Well, good night for those on this side of the world. Good afternoon or good day for those on the other side. But what are shorebirds? Shorebirds are amazing birds that look like this one on the picture, like these oyster catchers, or you can also find them flying over the let me see, flying over the waves on the sea, or feeding on muddy flats like this one. But probably the most common image of a shorebird is this that you can find on a coast. Small birds, big-headed, with colors that resemble the color of the sun, and that feed so very fast, pecking the substrate, and that are very scary. They fly with any distraction. These birds are amazing travelers. They travel using what we scientists call flyways, and these are avenues or streets. Imagine avenues or streets around the world where they travel in two ways, one way and then one way back to their breeding grounds. And the reason for this trip, it's simple. They need to get away from those places that are becoming cold and where resources are scarce. And they travel to warmer areas to ensure that they can survive. And after the places where they migrate to become cold and not enough resources are there, they come back to their breeding areas to reproduce and continue the life cycle that they live in. These birds are truly amazing animals. They are so small, like this western sandpiper. They weigh what a handful of almonds weigh, 25 almonds. Imagine these tiny birds traveling from Alaska to Peru, like 8,000 miles, around 8,000 miles. And these birds prepare their bodies for these big marathons. Now I want to take you and explain you that to make sure that these birds are protected during their travels, the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, the place that I work for, was created 30 years ago. This network protects 140 sites in the Americas, covering 18 countries. And beyond working on protecting these sites, I want to take you to a place in Central America. The place is called the Gulf of Fonseca. This Gulf is shared by three countries, Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador. And as you can see at the bottom of this map, this Gulf, it's important for at least 4 species of shorebirds that migrate from Alaska that breed in Alaska and the northeast coast of North America. But the Gulf of Fonseca, as I said, is important for shorebirds because it offers habitats like this one, like the salt flats that you're seeing on the left-hand side. The salt flats provide important resources for these birds, but also are important sites now for production of shrimp. And shrimp production in that area, it's been increasing in the last 30 years. So salt flats look like this before they've been affected by shrimp production, and then they look like this, where salt flats are transformed into shrimp ponds, and the mangrove line it's maintained so the seawater can enter the salt flats. But when a shrimp farm is harvested, dried, and cleaned, it looks like this one on the picture. And it's ready to receive and to maintain shorebirds. So shorebirds visit these shrimp farms, these shrimp pools, and visit them over the periods where they are empty. And they use all the areas in the shrimp pool, the bottom of the pool, the walls, and even places around it. We, in the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, are working with the sectors that produce shrimp in the Gulf of Fonseca. And I know I'm going to be a bit late to make sure that these producers produce shrimp that is friendly with the environment and with the shorebirds. Now you can tell the story that shrimps and shorebirds occur at the Gulf of Fonseca, and be ready because in a few years' time you will be able to buy shrimps that are being produced from the Gulf of Fonseca and that are friendly with the environment. With this, I want to finish, and I want to thank you, the organizers of tonight's event. If you want more information on this talk or in anything related to shorebirds, these are the networks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isadora. I love the idea of working with. Sometimes when we think of shrimp aquaculture, it's often not a really happy story. It's some concerns about damaging to wetland habitats or mangrove habitats. But here's a story where you've been able to work with them to create habitat for shorebirds. I think that's a great story.
Yes, I mean, shrimp farming is there to stay, and we can't combat that. We can't fight it too much. We have to work with them, and they're ready to work with us, some of them. So we have to take that advantage.
Yeah, and if other companies see that there's a competitive advantage to working with you all, then maybe that brings them along too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Isadora. If you have questions for Isadora about the Shorebird Network or about that working with agriculture, please do put those questions into the chat. We will see you soon, Isadora. Our next speaker is Jazzmine Waugh, a PhD candidate in biology data science at the University of Washington. Jazzmine works with the COAST program to understand how big data sets can help us understand the impact of climate change and other human-driven activities on seabird populations. Jazzmine, are you ready to explain how?
Yep.
All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here tonight and to talk to you about my adventures under the sea of bird data. I have my co-pilot Riri here. So the traditional scientific method that I teach my intro biology students at the University of Washington, I tell them you go out and make observations about nature that leads to hypotheses. Those hypotheses, you might collect some data to test them, and that leads to results. The problem is this doesn't always work. So there are some scenarios when the traditional scientific method might hit some limits. For example, if you're interested in the effects of climate change, it is frowned upon to burn down a forest or something like that and see how it affects the organisms that live there. Maybe it's too expensive to do the research that you want to do. Or maybe, like me, you're interested in the effects of something like oil spills where you don't know when and where they're going to happen until after they've happened. So the slightly complementary to the scientific method that we use instead in my lab, the COAST lab, is shown here. So COAST is the Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team. We go out into different communities. We do training to have people learn how to photograph and measure and identify to the species level any seabirds that wash up on their beach. Then COAST verifies all the data, and we use that to create a baseline, which you can think of as kind of the normal range of variation in the ecosystem that then later, if something interesting happens, will allow us to make a comparison with. At some point, we come up with a question that leads to a hypothesis, and we're able to just go to our database, our COAST database, and get the data we need to answer that question. In the past, some different uses of this data have included looking at the effects of climate, looking for early warnings for avian influenza, or looking at the effects of harmful algal blooms. I want to tell you about a specific use that I've used this data for. So we were interested in finding out whether different seabird species are impacted by oil spills to different extents. We used the COAST baseline data, and we compared it to proportions of dead seabirds found after 2 oil spills, the Nestucca and the Tenyu-Maru. So you can see on the left here, I have this like spill scenario where 70% of the birds found on the shore are common murres and 30% are some, seagull species, versus maybe in the baseline, we would find 60% of the seagull species and only 40% of the murre. So you can see there's a difference between what we might see during the spill versus the baseline. So this graph here shows on the y-axis the proportion of different seabird species found, and then we have 5 different seabird species here. So common murre, sooty shearwater, northern fulmar, rhinoceros auklet, and western gull. The blue bars show what proportion they made up in the baseline, and the gray dotted bars show the proportion they made up during the spill. So 2 of the species, common murre and rhinoceros auklet, were elevated in this spill beyond what we would have expected from the baseline, indicating that they're more impacted by spills, versus sooty shearwater, northern fulmar, and western gulls were elevated in the baseline relative to the spill, indicating that maybe they're less impacted by oil spills. And we can use research like this to prioritize birds either for rehabilitation or protection if we know how impacted they are by spills. If you're interested in learning more, you can scan that QR code to go to the paper. So the takeaway here is that to answer some questions we might be interested in, we have to find new ways of applying traditional scientific methods. If we can continuously collect a big baseline data set, we're ready whenever an interesting question arises. And here we have 3 coasters looking at a sooty shearwater and getting some coast data for us. So thank you. If you want to know more, you can scan the top QR code to go to my website, or the bottom one to go to the COAST website.
Thank you, Jazzmine. We also have both of those links, Jazzmine's website and the COAST website, in the chat if you'd like. Jazzmine, I've had some curiosity in the chat for an introduction to your co-speakers.
So the white fluffy one was the ragdoll Riri, and then the black fluffy one is Spooky.
Excellent. They're much better behaved than mine when it comes to presentations.
So far, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jazzmine. If you have questions for Jazzmine, and I've seen a couple come in already, go ahead and put those into the chat. Jazzmine, we will see you soon. And our final speaker for the evening is our own Brad Smith, School and Public Programs Manager here at the Seattle Aquarium, and an avid birder who's here to wrap up the evening with some advice on where and when you can get outside and see some seabirds. Brad, are you ready to take us home?
I'm ready.
Floor is yours.
All right. So now that you've heard about all these wonderful seabirds, I'm here to tell you how to find them out in the wild. So my name is Bradley Smith, and I would describe myself as a high-level, casual bird watcher. I love birds, and wherever I go, I'm going to be looking for them. So birds are some of the most visible and abundant wildlife for the average person. So bird watching can be incredibly rewarding and a great way to get outside. So I'm originally from the Northeast of the United States. I grew up bird watching, very familiar with East Coast bird species all my life. And even though I lived by the ocean for some time, seabirds themselves kind of seemed like something that was a bit out of reach. Usually you would have to get on a boat, a pelagic boat, and go out into like the Gulf Stream to really see a lot of different kinds of seabirds, or all the way up to Maine or Eastern Canada. Truly pelagic seabirds like alcids were especially rare for me to find. But in 2019, I moved to Seattle to work at the Seattle Aquarium. The Pacific Northwest was a big change, and I was excited for many things: the mountains, the islands, but also, of course, the birds. Many new species that I'd never seen before awaited me. Um, and on my first day of work, I wasn't disappointed. I saw a seabird, a pigeon guillemot, right by my place of work. Sure, I guess it helps that I work at the aquarium and right on the waterfront, but still, it showed that seabirds were not going to be very hard to find potentially. Since then, I've seen lots of different kinds of seabirds since moving here, some of them shockingly close to shore. Even a bird I would consider to be especially like exotic one, like this rhinoceros auklet, can be seen from shore. In fact, this is a photo I took from standing on land. During the pandemic, birding became an outlet for me, something to do, a way to connect with nature, and something that was also relatively safe to do outside of the house. So I'm here to share some tips on seabird watching in the Salish Sea. So first of all, where are the seabirds? Well, there's a few locations that I might recommend for starters for easy seabird watching, and these might actually be on your daily commute if you work here in Seattle. A stroll down the beach is a great time to look for seabirds. My tips for here is to scan the horizon and look for clusters of birds. You may see a flock of gulls and they may be drawn to a school of fish, and that's your dead giveaway to give that a look to see if there's something even more exciting than those gulls hiding in there. You might find something pretty rare. Next is marinas and bridges. These human structures provide roosting or even nesting sites for many different species of seabirds. These have the advantage of being easy to get to, well, except don't do any trespassing and definitely don't tell them I sent you. And lastly, there's ferry passages. If you're riding one of our many ferries in the Seattle area, this is pretty much like a mini seabird pelagic that you could take as you're getting somewhere else. This is a great time to see a lot of the seabirds we've been talking about tonight. And it's kind of a fun thing to do instead of just sitting in your car listening to a podcast. So what will you see if you go out on these expeditions? Well, seabird diversity in the Salish Sea is very high. It's some of the highest in the entire world. So this is just a great place to see them. You might be surprised what you find, even if you're pretty close to home. Here are some groups of birds to look out for. And this isn't a full list. This is just what I have photos of. These are all my photos. So one is ducks. So this is a great group that's one of my favorite because ducks, we have a lot of ducks here in the winter when a lot of other groups of birds disappear. So great to go out even when it's kind of cold or even bad weather. You're almost guaranteed to see some ducks. Next are cormorants. These are diving birds that you can often find around marinas, drying out their feathers after a day of diving for fish. Next are loons and grebes. These are very, very diverse in size and color, which have some very elaborate mating displays that you might see this time of year. And then next, my favorite, alcids. We heard about a couple different kinds tonight. They have great summer plumage and are really fun to watch. Puffins are my favorite. And then there's gulls and terns. These ones might be my personal nemesis. Gulls can be very challenging even for the advanced bird watcher, but that's kind of part of the fun of bird watching is to try to figure out what that gray thing is that you see over there. So what do you need to bring when you go out bird watching for seabirds? Well, here's some of the basic tools. I recommend getting a nice pair of binoculars. And then there's two apps that you should install on your phone. One is Merlin Bird ID, and the second is eBird. Merlin Bird ID can actually help you identify all the birds. It's a free app. It can even identify bird calls by listening to them. And then eBird is a checklist app, and I like to think of it as Pokemon Go for birds. It also helps to support scientific efforts to monitor these birds. And lastly, bring some friends out there. It's a great excuse to get outside. Thank you, and I hope you find some amazing birds out there on the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea.
Another one under the wire. I was totally gonna get you the lightning, but you just slid in there. Well done, Brad. Thank you so much, Brad. Do you have so you're a birder, so that means you have a life list, right?
I do, yeah. It can be kind of unwieldy to manage because I've trying to transition from paper to digital. I recommend starting digital. Use eBird. It keeps a life list for you.
Nice. Are there any seabirds on your life list that you have not spotted yet?
Quite a few. The number one for me was actually in this talk. There was a crested auklet picture earlier that one of our other presenters had. It's the one they always look like they're smiling. I really want to see some of them, but they're pretty rare here.
Nice. Okay. So Brad's not going to go anywhere. We're actually going to bring all of our speakers back to the screen because it's time for my favorite part of Lightning Talks, which is the Q&A. So we've already seen a ton of great questions coming in, and we're going to take a second to organize and put some things in order. So first I want to know, do any of you all have questions for each other?
Bradley, have you done bird watching outside the U.S. and where? If yes, where?
I have done bird watching in a couple of different countries. I've done Kenya, Madagascar, Malaysia, and a lot in the neotropics. And neotropics is probably my favorite.
Okay.
So just a couple spots.
Just a couple spots.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got some great questions rolling in, so many so that I want to jump right in. And Christy, since you went first, I want to drop a couple questions for you. People were really curious about the penguins and how they sort of responded to their trips. And so someone asked, is it like how long can penguins be away from the water before they're uncomfortable, or is that a thing at all? And then when after an outing, did you notice where they have an increase in appetite? Is this more activity than they would normally have?
Those are really great questions. For the first one, with how long can they stay out of the water? They could stay out for pretty long periods of time. Out in their natural habitat, a penguin, depending on the season, might be away from water for a very long time. However, when we take birds out on field trips or whatnot, we always make sure that we bring a spray bottle or something if we need to cool them off just in case. We also, the question about appetites, that can vary. And this amount of activity is pretty similar to things that we would do pre-pandemic, whether it was with those presentations or going to an encounter. But sometimes we would bring food as reinforcement to kind of add to the positive association of going to a new place. So that would come in handy. But we have had birds after going on various field trips where we'd save the reinforcement after, and they would have some good appetites.
Okay, that's to be expected, I suppose.
Yeah.
So Jazzmine, there's a question about you had mentioned that when you looked at the data compared to, when an oil spill was present, there was a disparity between the different kinds of birds you saw on the beach. Do you think that, someone asked, is it that disparity due to the bird's behavior? Why do you think the spill was affecting some birds and not others?
Yeah, there's a lot of hypotheses about why different birds might really be more impacted than others. Some of the main ones are kind of how far offshore they tend to go, how easily they might be able to move away from the spill, what kinds of things they eat, and even like how much their prey is affected might go up the chain to them. So we don't know kind of the extent to which these different things might be interacting, but that's sort of what we think.
Okay. So it could have something to do with what they're eating. That's similar to another question we have. Mike Smith was asking Lindsay, the murrelets, when they're away from the water and up in the trees, what are they eating? Oops, did we lose Lindsay? What happened to Lindsay? We lost Lindsay. So we'll pause on that question, and we'll jump to Jazzmine. Another question for you. There's a question about, you mentioned COAST is kind of a large citizen science effort, correct?
Yeah.
So how do you go about finding community members that are interested in going through that training and participating?
Yeah. So before we come down to the community, we'll start advertising maybe through local newspapers or whatever, like, are you okay with, going out and like getting up close and personal with dead things? And it turns out a lot of people are. So we get just a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'd love to go out and have a reason to be out on my beach on a monthly basis, learn something about how the ecosystem works.
So Isadora, I got super distracted when you were talking about the size of the shorebirds and the distance that they travel. How much are they eating in order to be able to power that flight? Because I would imagine you're out the wind and everything they have to deal with something that weighs a couple of ounces. It must need an incredible amount of energy.
Yeah, they are small birds, like what I said. They weigh what 25 almonds can weigh. So that's like 30 grams, 25 grams, something like that. And when they are getting ready to migrate, they have to prepare their bodies for that. So I don't know exactly how much they can eat, but what I know is that some species double the size of their bodies, of their weight, just to make sure that they have enough reserves to travel. And these birds can travel from Alaska down south to Patagonia, like the other tip of the Americas. So the bird that I showed on the presentation was a Western sandpiper. That's a long distance traveler, but not as probably red knots or other shorebirds. This is like a medium long distance traveler.
And is the network a really important part of being able to make that migration, being able to drop in and feed and then keep going?
Yeah, I mean, when the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network was created 30 years ago, it was created because scientists in the north found out that the birds were migrating south, and the places in the south were not as protected as those in the north. So it was necessary a network of sites along the migration route, the Flyway, to make sure that these birds had secure places to stop and feed and rest, and that they could get all the way down and then come back to the breeding areas. So then I have to say, yes, the network, it's important. It has at this time 114 sites, but we need more sites and more countries to join the network.
That interconnectedness is really important to the pathways and I would imagine, Lindsay, the interconnectedness of old growth forest is also really important to the murrelet's survival. We had a question that we asked just when you dropped, but what do the murrelets eat when they're away from the water and in the trees?
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, sorry about that, Jim. I think you're
Okay.
struck my computer.
It's always an adventure.
So murrelets, yeah, that's a great question about what they eat when they're away from the water. So they have a really cool nesting strategy where the male and the female of a mated pair switch off incubation duties. So once the egg is laid, then they incubate in 24-hour cycles. So one adult sits there for 24 hours while the other adult is on the ocean feeding and getting ready to fly back inland, and then they switch off usually before dawn, which is another reason why they're so mysterious. They're mostly active in the pre-dawn hours when it's still dark or foggy. Our coastal forests often have quite a lot of fog, and so they switch off, and then the other adult can go back out to the ocean to eat. And then later on, after the egg hatches, they have to deliver food to the chick at the nest. And so that's when their diet shifts to being more focused on fish and less. They don't usually feed any of the zooplankton like krill to the chicks. They need to feed good sized fish so that those chicks can grow really, really rapidly.
That's kind of a common strategy for seabirds, isn't it? I think, don't puffins trade time on the nest as well? Do I have that right, Christy?
Yeah, same thing. They have to bring the fish back until the chicks are big enough to get to the water on their own. And for murrelets, that means the chick doesn't get any practice time. They just have to fly right off that branch all the way to the ocean. It's pretty amazing.
So Lindsay, we had another question that was just curious about how does a murrelet end up on a tree nesting? Like what was sort of the evolutionary link there that sort of drove them up in the tree, or was it just a matter of one of those sort of gradual opportunistic things?
Yeah, I think so. So, most of the other alcids nest on islands or offshore rocks or sometimes in cliffs. Like the pigeon guillemot will nest in cliffs along the shore. And marble murrelets, actually up in Alaska, there have been some nests that have been found on the ground in cliff sort of scenarios. But it was most likely just a way to decrease competition for nest sites. And that coastal old growth forest was abundant and still very close to the water. And so it was probably just a sort of a natural happening.
So here's the $64,000 question. Christy, how does one get the job taking care of penguins and sea otters?
A little bit of luck. Right timing. I went to school in had a degree of marine science. I started my internship at Shed. I volunteered at Shed, so I was trying to really keep my face around. And then how I really got my foot in the door was otters and raising otter pups. So I very much had like an otter background, and then I got to learn penguins. So it's the best of both worlds. So, yeah.
Nice. So Isadora, here's another question that just came in. Jennifer Davis is asking, will the shrimp farms that the network is working with be able to sell like branded Shorebird friendly shrimp? Is there a certification process they'll need to go through, or how will that work? Is it like dolphin friendly tuna?
Thank you, Jennifer, for such a good question. What we do at the network, it's working with the producers to identify first to understand the practices of production of shrimp, and then to advise them on turning those practices into good practices, so that those practices and ways of producing are friendly with the environment and with the shorebirds. And so that the end of that process is the shrimp farms being able to produce shrimps that are friendly to the environment and that are able to sell in some sort of certification scheme those shrimps. So we're working towards that. It's a long shot. It's not always easy. It takes lots of time and resources and steps to make the final deal. But there are successful stories with other commodities, with rice, with coconut, with cocoa, with coffee. So there are things there to learn, and we're working towards that. So we'll see. Stay tuned. You might be able to buy shrimp that is certified.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. So here's a question for Jazzmine. Jazzmine, what other sort of big questions are you hoping to dig into with sort of this data heavy approach?
Yeah, one that was pretty cool, I'm still working on it, is we were wondering if we had data to find out whether when murs go through molt, so they're kind of a species that just drops a whole bunch of feathers really quickly, whether that makes them more in a position to be harmed by maybe like a storm or, some other event that moves in. And so we had to go through and say, like, do we even have like the measurement data where we can pick up like year to year differences in the proportion of birds that are going through molt that are also like being hit by storms and being more likely to die. And so that's what I'm digging into now. So I think that'll be interesting to see kind of what's the interactions between things like climate change and then maybe like a physical stressor like going through molt is for murs.
Interesting. So Brad, another question's come in is, are there bird watching groups? Are there other ways that people can get involved with bird watching if they're not looking to go out on their own?
Yeah, there's almost every city has different birding clubs. Actually, like social media is a great way to find them and find meetups for them. like other hobbies. Another really great way is to get in touch with your local chapter of the Audubon Society. Like we have a very active one here in Seattle that does walks, informal, a lot of them free, every single weekend and sometimes on weekdays as well too. So I think that that's a great way to meet like-minded people, bird people.
So Lindsay, here's a question I think, it popped into my head as well. The murrelets have a particular kind of branch that they're interested in. It has to be a certain width, right? But have they tried like creating artificial branches or platforms or other things? And why? My guess is they probably have. And do you have a sense of why they may not have worked?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yes, researchers have thought about this, and to my knowledge, no one has actually tried it, but there are a lot of good reasons for that. Mainly, it's this predator issue, the corvids in particular, and then more recently, folks who have been doing nest studies down here in Oregon have found that it's really important. Well, we already knew that the birds not only do they need a branch that's a particular width, but they need to have a lot of cover because of those nest predators. So they don't want the ravens and crows and jays to be able to see them. And a new predator that's been identified is actually the red-tailed hawk. And I don't know the exact differences between the habitats where red-tailed hawks might be able to predate a nest versus the more deeper forest predators. Because red-tailed hawks, you typically don't find them in a deep, dense forest. You find them along edges. And so the researchers at Oregon State University are working on that question right now to see what the differences are that are allowing red-tailed hawks to get into nests. And so there's been a lot of hesitation to try platforms because the thinking is that those would just be magnets for predators. Mm-hmm. The one thing that looks promising, though, is using playbacks, broadcasting recordings of marbled murrelet calls in habitat that seems to be good and appropriate habitat, but where there aren't murrelets at the current moment. And so that is something that folks are looking into now, and I think has a lot of promise for helping to restore marbled murrelet populations where they've blinked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking if you have platforms that may be perfectly designed, but would a murrelet be inclined to move into those spaces when they're looking for a different kind of habitat?
Right. Yeah. It's not as straightforward as just a certain size branch. And I think it's really hard for us to know what the exact perfect configuration is, with all of these other variables. So they're working on it, and never say never. I mean, platforms might be something that get developed in the future, but right now I don't think that's the top priority.
So Christy, when you were talking about Wellington, it made me think about, we talk a lot about empathy here at the Seattle Aquarium. We talk about the really strong benefit of giving an animal a name, and it really creates that animal as an individual. Do you feel like Wellington probably had his name before all of this happened, but how do you think the fact that you sort of identified him as an individual with his name and all of that? I mean, you could have just had was it a rockhopper?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. So you just have rockhopper penguin from the Shed Aquarium walking around town. Wouldn't quite be the same as Wellington, the rockhopper penguin, going around town. Could you talk a little bit about how you all sort of choose and use names at Shed Aquarium?
Yeah. For a long time, they did just have identification numbers, which obviously to the people that worked with them very closely, that pretty much was as if we were speaking about them with their name. So like Wellington is also 82. However, when we started doing penguin encounters, that was a question that we'd get asked a lot, is like, oh, like they don't have a name. So several years ago, maybe even like almost 10 years ago, we did do a full naming of the group, and all of the penguin names have some tie-in to a location where they could be found, whether it's in South America or the Falkland Islands, which is where Wellington gets his name. So it kind of helps just make them as an individual amongst our, group of almost 40 birds, because they are all individuals. Sometimes they think birds are all the same, but they're all individuals. And then Where's Wellington just had this great ring to it. So
Totally.
yeah.
That's great. Lindsay, one more question. I think someone was asking about those corvids, and just because a lot of people love crows and jays and just think of them really fondly. Is it the species that are just around those spaces, or like your corvids that live in town or live in our backyard? Are their populations a concern? Is it overall populations, or just in those sort of areas around nesting areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is sort of how it goes with ecology a lot of the time. We know that there is a dense network of connections between all, humans and all these other organisms around us, but we don't always know, the repercussions of our actions until later on. And so as far as murrelets go, it's the corvids that are getting food from humans in recreation areas that are near marble murrelet nesting habitat. But I've been thinking a lot lately about, if you just if you're eating an apple core on, while you're walking through your neighborhood and you toss the apple core in the bushes or something, it could be having the same kind of consequence in a, for this totally different habitat and a totally different network of species. So I had just never really thought of it too much before. You think of an apple as being, that's natural food. Yeah. But it can have these kinds of repercussions. So yeah, that's something that only just struck me very recently. So yeah, I don't have a great answer. I don't have any, a different habitat where the same problem has been identified. Oh wait, yes I do. The same issue occurs on our beaches for western snowy plovers. Western snowy plover nests are also depredated by various aerial predators, and for the corvids in particular, who really key into human food sources, we have the same issue. So yes, the answer is yes. It took me a minute to remember, but.
Yeah, and the message is consistent, right? It's the same as don't feed the bears. It's human food is for humans.
Yep.
Animals have their own sources, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times we think of feeding seagulls French fries or something, and the oil on those French fries and maybe even the starch is probably not that good health-wise, but going beyond health, there are these other issues that this stuff can affect.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. And thank you to all our speakers. That's all the time we have for this evening. I just want to thank all of you for your amazing presentations, fantastic Q&A. If you could maybe drop some applause emoji in the chat. I wish we were in person so we could give you a big standing ovation, but thank you all so much. If you enjoyed tonight's free online science events, then please do consider a donation to help keep these kind of online events like Lightning Talks accessible for all. And of course, if you're local and you can't get out to some of the spots that Brad suggested for seabird watching, come down to the aquarium. We've got a variety of shorebirds and seabirds and all kinds of sea creatures to boot. Now, we're super excited to announce that we'll be broadcasting our next Lightning Talks event live from the aquarium, as we always do. But this time, we'd like to invite you to be part of an equally live in-person audience. So join us on July 21st as we dive in to explore the underwater canopy of the kelp forest and all the fascinating creatures that rely on these habitats to survive. You may or may not be surprised to find out there are kelp forests right next door to the Seattle Aquarium, all throughout Puget Sound. Incredibly vibrant, incredibly important habitats that we all need to pay more attention to. So pay attention to the Seattle Aquarium website for more information about the in-person event and the live broadcast. We'll still be broadcasting Lightning Talks as we always do. And if you aren't already, please do sign up for our mailing list and you'll get all the information on our next event in July. Now, of course, you can see all of our past Lightning Talks events on our YouTube channel. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe and help us reach 10,000. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and have a great night.